the way you that will change the way you look at yourself, that will change the way you look at the world, the people in the world, your relationships, your workplace. So it's really going to bring about a very nuanced and fundamental change in your life and lead to productivity, enhanced efficiency, and success, not just at your workplace, but also different areas of your life. And that skill, as we all know, we're talking about emotional intelligence. So, what really is emotional intelligence? I'm going to cover, of course, the different aspects of it, the different pillars that hold this idea together, or the umbrella term, and what comes under emotional intelligence. How do you understand it better? Why is it so important? It's become quite the buzzword. We hear emotional intelligence all the time, but what does it really mean? What does it really look like in real time? How can it be helpful to you? And one of the most important aspects, what are some of the strategies, practical aspects, and actionable steps that you can take in your daily life to build this skill of emotional intelligence? So without further ado, I will start presenting my presentation. I would really welcome your thoughts, insights, anything that you'd like to ask, and anything you'd like to discuss. It'll just make the process more rich, and we'll all learn from it. And anything that you'd like to share in terms of observations that you've seen at your workplace while implementing any one aspect of emotional intelligence. But we'll come to that. So bear with me as I start my presentation today and start talking about emotional intelligence. All right. So emotional intelligence at work, developing your social skills for success, it says. It really is what is called the people currency skill. If it really is something that helps us to build those meaningful connections, those relationships, so a space where you can trust each other, you can be patient, you can manage stress, you can really regulate your emotions, and you can understand your emotions better and the emotions of other people, and get it all together to implement and practice it in a way that it gives you what you're looking for in terms of your goals. So let's delve deeper into it and understand the concept better. Before doing that, I'd like to launch a poll for all of you. And according to this poll, the question is that so you have to select one answer for the question being which one of the aspects given below helps you with your productivity and success at your workplace. So if you were to apply one aspect, or you generally do apply any one of these aspects, which one would that be? And how does that help? So I'll just launch the poll and I'd request everyone to please participate. And yes, it's right there in front of you. Please select one answer so that when we are done with it, let's look at the insights and how does it really help. Which one of these aspects helps you with your productivity and success at the workplace? Is it your skills with people, relationship skills, people skills? Is it your ability to understand other people and their internal world? Is it your ability to be calm under pressure, or be calm under stress and manage stress and yet focus on what you're looking at and pursue your goal? Awareness directed behavior, behavior which is directed by you being aware of what you're feeling and how you want to respond to that feeling. Is it good decision making, or is it stress management? So I hope everyone can look at the poll question.
There is no poll.
Okay.
I'll just launch it somewhere.
Okay.
I think, Saumya, you will have to launch it. Yeah. Can you see it now? Is it visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Perfect. This will be interesting, and I'd really like to see the insights of this. Okay, so we're waiting for everyone to answer. Most have answered, just a few left, and then we'll end the poll and look at the insights. Which one of these aspects helps you be productive and really achieve something meaningful and successful at your workplace? For that matter, even in your life, different areas of your life.
Okay,
Okay, I think we can end the poll.
sure.
All right. So we have the insights right here. So 30%, so 10 out of 13 people have answered. So 30% of the people feel 3 out of 10 that it's the relationship skills that really count. It's how you interact with people, how you're able to understand them, the connections that you build, how you network with them. 30% feel it is empathy, how you're able to really and truly enter another person's internal world and get to see what it must be like in their shoes. 20% feel it is the ability to just work and be calm under pressure or stress, and 20% feel it is awareness directed behavior. All right, so we've got a mixed bag here. Thank you so much for answering, everyone. And I'd really like to understand and just request any one of you to share your insights. If you've selected relationship skills, how has that helped you? If you've selected empathy, how's that helped you? Any one of you, would you please unmute yourself and just share your insights with us? How's that been helpful for you at the workplace? Would anyone like to share? That would be really helpful and meaningful for all of us. You can either raise your hand or write it in the chat section as well. Okay.
I actually uh, hold for empathy, but
Okay.
relationship skills are also very critical and important for me.
Right.
And some key things related to this is building trust and all, right? Unless you build the relationship, you cannot work in teams, you cannot delegate stuff, you cannot get things done from your boss or from. So having a relationship is the basic fabric which is required at a workplace. So that's very critical. There could be many things like building trust and all of those and following through promises, but that skill is important for the bonding and get things done and deliver. So it is important, but I thought empathy is more important than really relationship skills if I were supposed to pick one.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing, sir. I think that was very beautifully articulated that relationship skills and empathy, when you're really able to connect people and you were really able to understand people, you have enhanced your ability to get them to work on a certain task together. You're able to work through teams. You're able to really get people to trust you with following instructions or just understanding what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and where it needs to be done. So I think that was really useful. Thank you for sharing. We have one more in the chat section that relationship is important as we can discuss our feelings and get some sort of solution or responses. I think another very useful insight, when you have great relationships among team members or with your colleagues or with leaders or managers, I think you're also able to build a space or create a space for open, authentic, and honest communication where people, even if they're struggling, they're able to approach that space and talk about what is it that they're struggling with, or what is the challenging aspect of any task, any project, or anything which they're trying to work upon in order to reach their goal. So the thank you so much for answering, everyone. The whole intention and motive for this question was to help all of you and all of us understand and reflect on how important basically these are elements of emotional intelligence, and how important each of these are in your daily life, and how does it look like um, in everyday life as we work through different challenges, whether it is connecting with people, being aware of your own emotions, managing emotions and what you decide to do with it, and directing behavior accordingly. Which brings me to my next slide, which is really about understanding what emotional intelligence really is. So, of course, I'm going to explain the study first. The largest study that was done on adult development by Harvard really studied people. It was a longitudinal study, so it studied people from the time that they were born until the time that they were well into their 50s and 60s. And then it just tried to understand some of the people turned out successful and some, well, not so much. And when I talk about success, it's also success holistically. People who were doing great at work, they found their work meaningful, they were at good positions, they were in leadership positions as well. They had great relationship with their team members. They loved to come to work. Well, most of the days they did. They were also people who had satisfactory relationships at home. They had most days they had work-life balance, and they just found a sense of purpose and meaningfulness in their everyday life. And when these people were actually studied further and it was delved deeper, that what do these people have that's different from the rest of them? Well, of course, we know the answer. It was emotional intelligence. And to a lot of people's surprise, it was not IQ. It was not your intelligence quotient, but it was EQ, which is also referred to as emotional intelligence. I'm going to refer to it's emotional quotient, but I'm going to, for easier communication, I'm going to talk about emotional intelligence as also EQ. So it was really emotional intelligence that was the one quality that stood out for these people. So, what really is emotional intelligence? Well, we need to understand one thing. Everything, the entire world, the information that we take in through our senses, the first thing that it goes through is a part of the brain, which is the limbic system, which is where emotions are produced. So basically, everything is to do with emotions. But it's not just that. It's not just about producing emotions and experiencing them. There's another part of the brain, which is the rational thinking part of the brain. And it is to do with what we do with those emotions, how we understand those emotions, how we acknowledge them, and how we manage them. And once we're able to do that, how we're able to really direct behavior and help it to impact our productivity and really do something out of meaningful out of our lives. And this coordination between our rational thinking brain and the emotional part of the brain is what really is emotional intelligence in real time. So when we talk about emotional intelligence, of course, there are many pillars to it. There is emotional awareness, there's self-awareness, there's regulation of your emotions, there's understanding people, but it is different elements, but mostly it boils down to two competencies, which is your personal competence and your social competence. The personal competence being you being aware of your emotions, what you're feeling at a particular moment. Emotional regulation, what are you doing with that emotion? How do you manage or regulate that emotion, especially in a difficult situation? And then is the social competence, which is how you're able to relate to other people, how you're able to navigate through the social connections, which is relationship skills, and also empathy. How do you make the other person feel in your presence? How are you able to really establish a meaningful connection and build a sense of trust, patience, safety between people. So it's these two competencies that really emotional intelligence boils down to. Now, we can also, there's also one more thing that we can check upon right now, which is that you can just ask yourself which is slightly more stronger for you than the other. Is it your personal competence or is it your social competence? Now, I'll tell you one more thing here. Most of the times, if we are able to be more aware of what we are feeling and make sense of it and really regulate it and use it to direct our behavior, it's also going to guide us in terms of how we understand other people's behavior, how we understand the cues that the world is trying to present to us, and really get to establish connections based on empathy and getting to know what the other person might be going through. So, a lot of the times you will have both as your strengths, but it is worth asking yourself which one of these aspects is something that is slightly more stronger than the other. Now, moving forward, emotional intelligence, what does it look like in real life? How has it really, we're talking a lot about managing emotions, being aware of your emotions, how the brain works, where do emotions go to, and how what do we do to make sense of it and direct our behavior. Imagine being in a space where you are, most of the times, you are in control of what you say, how you speak, what you understand of other people's behavior, and how what you choose to say or respond back. Isn't that a very, very strong aspect and power that you're carrying with you all the time? So, how have people all over the world, how have companies or organizations all over the world really used this skill? Well, I'd like to present a case study from a place that we're all aware of, which is Starbucks. Now, we've all gone to Starbucks, we've all gone to different coffee shops, and we've all placed orders. You go to the counter and you place your order, and most of the times, what happens is the person takes the order, and then once the order is ready, you're called to give the order. Now, one of the first companies and organizations that did understand the importance of really working on people's skills and really making people feel important and their presence felt in whenever they walk up to their store was Starbucks. So what they decided to do was that every time you place an order, they would ask your name. We're all aware of this. They would ask your name, and instead of saying your cappuccino is ready or your mocha latte is ready, they would say, well, Saumya, this is your cappuccino. And that's when you hear your name, amongst a crowd of people, you hear your name, it just does something. It just sounds meaningful in some way, and you feel a little that personal connection that they establish. It impacts you in some way, to the point that they started to see more and more people coming into the store. Of course, I'm not saying this is the only thing. There's so many factors at play. But when people were really asked about, what is it that they really like about, ordering at Starbucks, a lot of the people answered by saying that, when they call out my name, and this is when they started, of course, now a lot of people have started doing that. When they call out my name with my order, instead of just my order, it just makes me feel like there is a human element, there's a personal element to it. So it's really walking the talk. And that's why I wanted to present this to help you understand that there are people, companies, organizations all over the world who really started to use this, who really started to take cues and understand and practice this in real time. Understanding cues, making the person feel important, understanding what they need, giving that to them, supporting them, making them feel that they can trust the space. They can feel important in this space. And Starbucks was one of them. I'd like to now probably ask you any other story where you've heard this, any case study, any organization, or any even a small anecdote where you've really seen emotional intelligence in practice in real time. I think all of us would really like to hear that. Would anyone like to answer where you've seen people really working on building a space that makes you feel heard, that makes you feel acknowledged, that makes you feel important. There's some personal element to it. And it feels like it's not just business, it's really for the people there. Can I have anyone who'd like to answer, maybe in the chat section, or just unmute and let us know where have you noticed emotional intelligence really in practice?
Generally, when organizations they are feeling that majority of the people are not fully geared up for emotional intelligence, they are shifting the burden to HR to fill those gaps. So HR generally steps in with birthday celebrations and acknowledging special individual events and all. I wish some of that can be, if it is transferred and owned by people like direct reporting managers and things like that, it would help. But definitely we see HR comes under a lot of pressure to fill those gaps or shortcomings which rest of the people in the office they lack on this relationship skills or these personal cues.
Thank you so much. I think that was so precious as an answer. I think it just gave us all so much to reflect and think about. That in any organization, it's not just the role and responsibility and job of the HR, and it isn't supposed to be a saving grace or isn't supposed to be like a firefighting thing that you do. I think there is so much of a need to establish an environment where people generally, you don't have to come to a point where it needs to be taken up as crisis intervention or really something that needs to be done about so that people do not feel the way that they're feeling, but establishing a culture by leaders, by managers, by supervisors, and generally by people, where giving and receiving feedback, for example, things like giving and receiving feedback is a process which is not met with fear and so much of nervousness, but it is a process that is met with trust and patience, where meeting deadlines doesn't mean it's your world is coming to an end, but it also means that there is support and resource that you can ask for. There is help that is available, and how can you access it? Dealing with challenging relationships with colleagues, with managers, is something that is taken up on a regular basis and not as a last resort or not as a crisis management thing, or even working through setbacks and failures or navigating change. I wish this is such a fundamental thing that really impacts the fabric, the culture of a workplace. And this needs to be taken up at a regular level where people just feel safe and heard. And this reminds me of an example that was about a project Aristotle at Google, where a bunch of researchers got together and they just started to study teams and groups of people working together. And they just wanted to understand what is it about some teams that do so well and are so successful in managing projects and really managing tasks while others are not. And they've looked at different elements. They looked at people giving in more hours. They were looked at was it a group with more qualified people? Was it a group with people having better skills at the task or communication? But ultimately, it was found out that the thing that really mattered, which is very strongly related to emotional intelligence, is psychological safety, where people in a group are able to trust each other. They feel everyone is patiently listening to them. When they speak, they're heard. They're heard actively. What they say matters. And if they're struggling, there are people out there to really support them. So I think it's really the emotional intelligence skills. It's managing your emotions, it's regulating them and how you do it and how that can drive behavior, which can really lead to successes in these areas. Now, moving on. Okay, so this is one thing that we must understand. about emotional, because we are talking so much about emotions and the role of emotions, and how emotions can be one of the strongest drivers of your behavior. And your behavior, of course, being one of the most fundamental tools that will help you reach where you want to reach. So there's this thing about emotions. So I was talking about the emotional brain and the logical thinking brain, as you can see in the diagram, that the picture that is there on the screen. Well, how many of you, a lot of times, you've been in this situation where you're suddenly giving a presentation and you're in the flow and things are coming so well, and you feel like, this is going so well, until there is one comment from one of the team members or one of the colleagues, or for that matter, one of the managers who's sitting in the presentation, and it just triggers you, or it hits you where it hurts the most. And before you know, the flow is broken, and you feel you are under the grip of this intense emotion, sometimes anger, sometimes frustration, sometimes disappointment, and you don't know what to do with it. And you're standing there, the flow broken, not knowing how to proceed, and just sometimes struggling with this intense, uncomfortable emotion. How many of us have been through that? I'm sure a lot of us. And what really happens is, and you don't know what to do. And even when you go back, you feel like, there was something that happened there, and it just took that control away from me. So what really did happen? Well, what this is called is, it's called emotional hijack. So a lot of the times what happens is, sometimes we go through experiences, like I said, experiences enter and they go through the part of the brain, the limbic system, and that again, it makes, and then it goes further on and it makes sense of the emotions. But a lot of the times, what happens is, in the grip of some experiences which trigger us more than others, we feel very intense, strong emotions, mostly uncomfortable ones. I wouldn't say bad emotions because there are no bad emotions, but uncomfortable emotions. And to the point that it's hijacked your logical thinking brain. And you're standing there not knowing what to do, what choice to make, what decision to choose, and your logical thinking ability has been compromised, and you're just feeling this pure anger or frustration or disappointment, and probably you've frozen, you don't know what to say next or how to respond next. This isn't, I want to say, this isn't just you, it happens to all of us. This phenomenon is called emotional hijack. All of us go through it. What happens is, the part of the brain, the amygdala, which is also called the lizard brain, it takes over and it hijacks the logical thinking, reasoning, and the cool, calm part of your brain. And this is how it may look like at the workplace. We've all gone through it. Now, a quick tip: what do you do in that moment? Now, of course, we've all had responses, we've all had reactions which we've regretted later. And when asked later, we've mostly responded with, well, I didn't get the time, or I just felt the emotion so strongly, I didn't know what to do. Now, of course, in the long term, I would ask you to create that space between the stimulus and the response, and that can be done through various practices and strategies, which we'll come to. But in that moment, what do you do to really de-hijack or make that process, de-catastrophize the process? The one thing that you really need to do is to practice something that will calm you down to the effect that at least the hijack is not there, and you're able to access the logical thinking part of the brain. How do you do that? One quick strategy is the 3 R, the 3 second response, the 3 SR, what I generally call. So what you really do is, in that moment, you remind yourself to take 3 seconds, and you can, if you can couple it with a deep breath, well, that would be great. So you take 3 seconds and probably take a deep breath, and then when you respond post that, most times you will notice that your response is something that is not is not a reaction, it's a response, and it's mostly coming from a space of control rather than from a space of emotional hijack. So it is the 3-second response that you have to practice. So the next time you're giving that presentation and you feel that there is an emotional hijack happening, practice the 3-second response, and you will see that space coming between the stimulus and the response, and you will feel more in control of the response. Now, the most important part that we've been waiting for. We've spoken so much about emotional intelligence, but how do you really build it? What are some of the practical, actionable, doable steps that you need to practice to build emotional intelligence? Well, first of all, as I've already told you, it is a skill that can be built with step-by-step practice because it is found in that part of the brain which we call the fluid part of the brain, which can change, and there is and which can be built upon with regular experience, practice that helps to forge it. Now, first things first, to build emotional intelligence, of course, one of the skills that is also a very important part of emotional intelligence is managing stress. Now, the interesting thing and aspect about stress is, well, some bit of stress is really helpful to us. Some of us may not believe it, but some amount of stress is really helpful to us, which what we call is eustress. So if you see some amount of stress building in a way where it really drives you towards performance, there are parts of the brain which get activated, the parts of the brain responsible for memory, for productivity, for motivation, they get activated. So some amount of stress really drives performance. So as the stress increases to that optimal point where you're able to focus, where you're able to learn better and memorize better, it's good for us. But if the balance tips onto distress, that's when a vicious cycle happens. And what is this vicious? What is this vicious cycle that we're talking about? Well, of course, stress is bad news. We all know that. When there is distress, when stress increases beyond a limit, of course, it compromises our physically immune system and all of that. But it compromises our ability to think clearly. It compromises our ability to take rational decisions, make choices, connect with people, regulate our mood. So imagine you're undergoing stress. It will impact your mood. You're not in a great mood. You will not be connecting to that colleague or to that manager well, and it will impact the process or the task that you're working on, which will lead to probably more stress. So it is a vicious cycle. So first things first, we need to manage the stress, but when it tips over to distress, how do you manage it? Well, there was a study done at University of Berkeley where people and their stress levels were being studied. Of course, we all know the drill. We know that stress management is important. You have to exercise. You have to focus on meditation. You have to do things for mental fitness, and we will come to that. But apart from that, I want to quote this research because what happened was that in this research, um, when stress was being studied in students, they were asked to stop and they were asked to remember this one thing. They were asked to stop and they were asked to remember this one thing that they were grateful for, that they were thankful for, that brought them a sense of gratitude. And what happened was, when it was studied, they realized that the part, because of the gratitude, because of the thing that they were thankful for, their stress hormone, which is cortisol, was brought down by 23%. So it really worked. So what you need to do next time is, next time you're experiencing this stress, take a moment, stop, and think about that one thing that makes you feel really grateful, that makes you feel really thankful. And that's how you manage your stress. Of course, there are other practices, as I said, that we come to. And emotional intelligence in practice, in real life, is also a lot about how you work under pressure, under stress. Now, moving forward, People skills, relationship skills. I can't emphasize that enough. Now, talking about relationship skills, a lot of times when we meet people, we're so much more focused on appearing interesting. We might want to say things that are interesting. We might want to crack a joke. We might want to do something that make other people focus on us. But the thing about building these relationship skills is also how you make the other person feel, and not just about how you get their attention. So it is about being more interested in people versus being interesting. How do you become more interested in people? Well, listen better, ask open ended questions, watch your body language, be more open towards them, look them in the eye, maintain eye contact, try to use their name as many times as you can. First of all, try to remember their names, approach them before they approach you, and really try to understand where they're coming from instead of judging their behavior or their body uh, body responses, or instead of judging their body language, understand what is underlying that behavior. What is it that they're probably going through? That way you're also applying skills of empathy. So I'd also like to quote one more example. So there was a couple that opened a bike touring company in the US. And what they did was, there were a lot of bike touring, there was a lot of competition, there were a lot of bike touring companies that were opening up. But what they wanted this to be different. So what they did was they really started to apply this skill, and they called it the beanie skill, where they wanted to be more interested in people versus them appearing more interesting to the people. So whenever someone would just open the gate, they would walk up to those people. They would be open in terms of body language, not, for example, keep their hands in the pocket. They would really like to know about the other person. They really went that extra mile to make the other person feel heard. They would listen. They would try to ask open ended questions. They would try to establish trust. They would use their name. And this is how they appeared more interested. And what happened was, of course, the sales skyrocketed and the company was doing well. But more than anything, when people were asked about their experience, they said that it feels like someone really wants to listen to you whenever you enter that store or that company or that organization. And that made all the difference. So next time you want to really connect with people at your workplace or around you, try to be more interested in them versus appearing more interesting to them. The smile challenge. All right, this is also one of my favorites. So, one of the researchers working on emotional intelligence talked about the smile challenge. So, this is something that you can also take as a challenge. So, what you need to do is, for the next few days, what you do is that you go around people, probably at the workplace, and you have to give yourself a challenge that you have to make at least 3 people smile by mostly smiling at them. But you don't have to talk, you don't have to say anything, you don't have to use words. You just have to use your own facial expressions, which we mostly do by smiling, to make them smile. Now, how would this help? One, when we use facial expressions, there are mirror neurons in the brain. So you will see that if someone's smiling at you and you feel, trust towards that person, and you feel warmth towards that person, and you probably know the person, you will see a smile coming. You will want to smile back. It's almost like a hunch. If people ask why do you smile, you'll feel like, I don't know, it just felt natural. Because when it comes to emotions, there are mirror neurons in the brain which you like to kind of which like to mirror the emotion that you're seeing in front of you. So try the smile challenge, and what you'll do is you will put all of the other skills of emotional intelligence in action. So for example, you smile at someone, let's say they smile back. Well, there you go. You've already started to establish a meaningful connection with someone. You've started to establish a space where that someone can trust you. That's the smile challenge. Now, the other thing about the smile challenge. Now, let's say you smile at someone and the other person may not smile back. So, what happens is you probably reflect back that, maybe this person is going through something. Maybe this is a difficult day for them. Or what if things are so challenging that they couldn't even smile back? So, there go your empathy skills getting activated. Now, the third situation, you smile at the person, but you feel you're not really able to smile that day. Now, that's your emotional awareness and emotional regulation in getting activated. So, you sit back and reflect, well, what am I going through today? What am I feeling right now? Emotional awareness. What do I need to do for this? Emotional regulation. What support do I need? How do I support myself? Emotional regulation. So these are some of the skills. These are basically all of the emotional intelligence skills that will become activated once you start the smile challenge. So maybe next time, go to your workplace and tell yourself, I have to make 3 people smile today, mostly by smiling, not using words, and see how reflective a process it is for you. Of course, apart from making and building relationships. Train your brain, of course, because just like we train our body to build muscles, we also train our brain to build the skill of emotional intelligence. So, how do you train your brain? There are some very actionable, doable steps and strategies that you can follow. For example, first thing is identifying emotions. I always say, if you can name it, you can tame it. That means at any point, just sit back, take a couple of minutes, and maybe do this every day. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Maybe you're feeling so many different feelings. We go through almost 400 different emotional experiences in a day. So ask yourself, what am I feeling in this moment? And name it to yourself. And name it by I statements. So instead of saying, I am sad, you say, I feel statements. I feel sad. That way, you're not defining yourself through the emotion, but you're just saying that my mind and body is registering it. Now, as soon as you've named and identified and acknowledged that emotion, the problem solving part of your brain gets activated, which means there is the part of the brain which will help you to understand now that I'm feeling this, what do I need to do? Or what do I need in this moment? If let's say I'm feeling happy, so, do I want to do something about it? If I'm feeling maybe upset, do I need someone's support? So, you name it to tame it. That's how you train your brain. Of course, the role of mindfulness. Mindfulness, the practice of slowing down and focusing on the present moment. So, there was this example that I was giving about emotional hijack. That if only we had the time between what happens, the situation, and our response to it, the space and the time. And that's where mindfulness comes in. It gives you that much needed time. How do you practice mindfulness? Very simply put, choose one of your sense organs as the anchor to the present moment. For example, I'm going to ask you to probably do it right now. Take a moment. If you want to close your eyes, otherwise, probably look downwards and just focus on the different sounds that you can hear right now. Just sit with your back straight, probably shoulders relaxed. If you'd like to close your eyes and think about the different sounds that you can hear in this moment. All right. And now you can just bring your focus back and just look at the different sounds that you noticed. Well, did you get distracted? Yes, it's very natural and normal to get distracted. But what you need to do is every time you get distracted, bring your focus back to the anchor, which right now was the sounds. So that was mindfulness practice for you. It will give you the much needed space that you need for regulating your emotion and directing your behavior in a way which is helpful to you and that you'd like. The role of self care. Well, we're much more likely. Imagine you're a cup and that cup is depleted physically, emotionally, socially, cognitively, uh, practically. There's so many things that have really taken out the resources and from that cup, and you haven't been able to fill it. In that state, you're much more likely to react, to have reactions that you feel were not in your control, or to have very intense reactions. So, what do you need to do for self care? You need to nourish yourself and practice self care to be able to be more in touch with your emotions, regulate them, build better connections with people. How do you practice self care? Well, there are 5 types of self care: physical, emotional, social, practical, cognitive. Physical, you focus on your diet, you focus on your sleep hygiene, you clean up your sleep hygiene, you focus on what you're eating, you listen to your body, you get adequate rest, and you get adequate hydration, you give yourself enough movement. Physical is self care, is followed by emotional self care. So, what do, you give yourself regular time and space to really process, and express your emotions. Now, that could be with a friend, with a loved one that you speak to every day through journaling, or really sitting with yourself and telling yourself what you're feeling. Social self care is really reaching out to people that you don't meet and connect with on a daily basis. So it could be just exchanging. It could be this, it also includes the smile challenge. It could be passing that hi to your neighbor, or to a colleague or to someone in the workplace who you don't exchange pleasantries with. That social self-care, practical self-care involves things that is important for us, but we really avoid. For example, making your to-do list, cleaning up your budget, or just organizing your tasks for the day, or just cleaning up your workspace. So that is practical self-care. And finally, we have the cognitive self-care, where you do activities that make you feel cognitively challenged and stimulated, like art, uh, like creating something, reading, puzzles, riddles, Sudoku, so many things. Coming on to emotional expression, of course, it's a part of self care. You need that space where you can regularly express your emotions and social connections. It is very much a part of how nourished you feel on an everyday basis. How the people around you, how you're able to really choose the people around you with whom you can feel like you trust them, you don't feel judged, you feel there is a sense of patience, and there is a sense of emotional safety. So, how do you build those connections? Understand one thing about social connections: you will have to take the initiative. So, that's the thing about social connections. And last but not the least is your internal weather forecast. Well, we've all been in situations where we were given a warning that tomorrow there's going to be a storm, a thunderstorm, it's going to rain, and there's weather's going to be rough. And what do you do? But you have to go out for some important work. So what do? You go out prepared in a certain way. You carry an umbrella, or you carry your raincoat, or you just do something which will protect you from the rain. So that's what you do. Now your feelings are like your internal weather. So if you regularly check in with your feelings, how am I feeling today? How my what triggers me? In what situations do I really feel annoyed? And you know, and you're prepared. For example, you know that during that meeting there is this one colleague who always says things who always cuts me off, and it just makes me feel very irritated. But now that you know, now that you're prepared, how would you like to choose to respond to the situation in a way that you don't regret it and it makes you feel empowered? So think about how you're feeling. Ask yourself multiple times a day, take a moment, and then tell yourself that now that I'm aware that this is probably how I feel, or this is what's going to happen, how do I choose to respond to it? And with that, we come to the end of the presentation, and also just reflecting back to the audience poll question. So now we understand, now I'm sure you understand better the elements that really help you build emotional intelligence, relationship skills, managing your stress under pressure, stress management, empathy, understanding other people, awareness directed behavior, and making choices and decisions that are directed from a space of awareness versus from a space of impulse. So, thank you so much. And thank you for being a very, very mindful and present audience. And if there are any questions, any queries, feedback, I'll be happy to answer that for you.
May I request anybody who has questions to type in the chat window? So Saumya, actually the question, while we are waiting for the response, the questions which people send in the registration form are really, really very, very diverse. But I think one particular one which struck me was, how do you build emotional intelligence in students, in a classroom setting? So any
Right.
tips for that?
Yes, sure. I think in a classroom setting, I think it's also a great place to start because it will establish a culture. So one, it needs to be consistent practices of certain things, and you can just make it more playful and fun for the students. So practicing things like emotional awareness. So you do a feeling check-in before you start a class with them. Maybe just ask them how they're feeling on that particular day and before that class, or ask them, now that they're feeling this way, what do they really need, or how would they like to support themselves? So that's one thing about emotional awareness. Maybe giving them the smile challenge, where they have to make other people smile, without using words, without really saying something. And that's where they're using body language, non-verbal communication, to build meaningful relationships. And they're also getting their empathy skills activated. So that's another thing. Uh, I think giving them bite sized mindfulness practices, which will help them to really create a space between what they're feeling and how they'd like to respond to it. So maybe just before the class starts, just giving them a minute of focusing on their breath, or focusing on the sounds around them, or just focusing on their bodily sensations for that matter. So that's something that can also be done to manage stress. You can ask them one thing that they're grateful for. And I think essentially and fundamentally creating a space where they feel that they can come and talk about challenges, or something that's bothering them, or something that they're really struggling with, will create a space for an emotionally intelligent and safe classroom. These are some of the tips.
Very well said, Soumya. And I think lot of it can also be applied to the workplace context as well. In smaller teams, I think the smallest team is probably 4 to 5 people, and that's where you can start applying like a mood check you mentioned, and how people are feeling about themselves. I also really like this thing about naming your emotion. I think that's something we just don't have the time to do that, and the reaction flows before the realization that there is an emotional trigger. So wonderfully explained. There are a lot of other questions which are very specific to an organization, and I'll be happy to reach out to any one of you, and we can share with you the programs which Samvedna does for organizations. So we do group workshops, we do organization-wide mental well-being assessments. We do one-on-one wellness coaching. We also run counseling helplines for the organization, which is if you are very keen to establish a platform for your employees to be able to reach out to somebody for mental well-being. So we do have a counseling helpline, which you could sign up for as an organization. And then, of course, there are workshops and which are delivered online as well as in person. So we'll be happy to discuss that. Also want to just share with you that it will be great if you all can go and take your own self-assessment with Samvedna map tool that will help you understand your own emotional well-being. And the first consultation here is complimentary. So if you want to take that self-assessment and speak to one of our counselors and understand your results and care plan, we'll be happy to do that. And do rate us, do let us know how you like this session, and if you are happy, we'll be happy to see a Google review. So I'll just share the link here. So kindly do mention your thoughts. It will help us. And also let us know what else you would like to hear about. So we'll be happy to come up with more curated topics for of your interest. So here is the Google review link for anyone to please share your feedback. And if there are no more questions, then I think I would like to just thank Saumya for your time and putting this together. I hope this would be of relevance to all those attending. And we'll also be sharing this link to the recording for those of you who may have missed it for a short time. And so we'll be happy to answer any questions. You can reach out to us at contact@samvednacare.com for any specific queries you may have. So please do write. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Saumya.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.